So Sam, I'm excited about this one. We've got a different view on the practice ownership journey. Usually when we get guests on, it is somebody who's in the weeds with lots of questions for Sam and lots of problems. And now we've got somebody from the other end. Why do you run your vet business? Seriously, what's the long-term goal? For Dr. Michael Archinal, selling it was always part of the plan. And a few years ago, he reached that goal. And in this conversation, he takes the 1,000-foot retrospective view to unpack what it took to get there. From his supernatural trick for getting rid of challenging staff members, you'll love this one, to a handful of numbers he watched every single month, including one that sounds incredibly boring until you hear what he was actually measuring. Knowing when it's time to let go. And the thing he says right at the end about failing, that Sam reckons might be the most important thing that you take away from this conversation. I'm Dr. Hubert Heemstra, veterinarian, former practice owner, and host of The Vet Vault. And this is the Veterinary Business Accelerator, the podcast for vet practice owners who want more time, more profit, and more freedom from the day-to-day grind of practice ownership. Your guide is Dr. Sam Bowden, veterinarian, author, and founder of the Accelerate Practice Academy, where he has helped hundreds of practice owners to build profitable, sustainable businesses. Michael is an old friend of Sam's, and in this one, you get to sit in on their catch-up. And there's a lot to learn. Okay, let's get to work.
Yeah, look, I think someone has got the power of hindsight, gets some very powerful distinctions. And when you're further distant away, you can see what really worked and, what things you do differently. So I've asked Michaal Archinal, who's a great mate of mine, to come and have a chat today because he's had a number of business iterations, if you like. The last one, he ended up, what was it, Arch? 9?
9.
Yeah, so 9 practices that he was essentially a major shareholder of. I'll let him explain how that all works. But I thought I'd just quickly tell you how I first met Arch, because there's an interesting story in this around intention. It was back in the days when I was running the United Vets Group, and I'd heard about this bloke, Michaal Archinal, who ran a really successful practice down in Canberra. And someone had said, proximity is power. It's important to get around people who are doing things really well. And I went, great, I'd really like to meet this guy one day. So I remember writing down, meet Michaal Archinal. That was kind of written down on a book in one of my intentions I'd set. Fast forward about 2 months and I get an email from Mars Pet Care, and they were putting together a group of, I'm not sure, was it thought leaders, Arch, or influencers? I wasn't sure what the term they used was, but I thought it was quite funny at the time. And invited me on this journey to go over to the US and see what was happening over there, and then go to the UK and see what was happening there. And I looked down the list and there was one name called Michaal Archinal on the list. So I got to hang out with this wonderful guy over a couple of weeks, have some long conversations, but also identified him as what I call a 1%er. So there's 1% of people who are just that really top level, but he's a 1% guy as well. So that's how I got to meet Arch, and over the periods of time we've sort of chatted a lot and shared each other and helped each other on their journeys. But Arch, you've got to the holy grail of what many people are trying to achieve. Is very successful, you've helped a lot of people, you've built some amazing practices, you've tapped out, and now you're living the land of milk and honey.
Sam, that's a very humbling intro. Thanks, my friend. Yeah, look, I have, and it's important to know when it's time too. We all talk about going into business, setting up businesses. Very, very rarely do you ever come across anyone who talks about the other end. There was one guy said once, the goal of a business, to have a business, is to sell it. So if that's the goal, well, oftentimes we've got no idea what we're doing to get there. And yeah, I've got the luxury of stepping out at 59. Just be careful though. I said to my business partners once, who are just legends, we're right in the thick of things, it's all happening. I said, what do you guys see me, future? And they said, well, 6 months would be good. But I always said my job as a business partner, if I'm going to sell a business, and hand on heart, I want them to be successful, I've got to become redundant. So you get to the point where you become redundant and you've got to suck your ego up and go, well, that's a mark of success, and just humbly fade off into the distance. To the point that I've never been back to one of my 9 hospitals in the door the day I sold. Handed the keys over. Wow. That's it.
I think that's a mark of success too, because a lot of people say, oh, wasn't it your baby? How'd you sell your baby? And, to be able to step back and go, no, I feel like that chapter's finished and I'm comfortable with that. And I've got a question around that. What did you identify that you felt that journey has come to close? You're happy to tap out. There must have been some way of thinking or feeling that you decided, hey, I think I can hang up my spurs now.
Mark Taylor, cricket captain, said you want to retire before you start dropping catches. And it really resonated with me. And the speed of knowledge, of medical knowledge, is, turnover's pretty quick. And I was finding it increasingly challenging to keep up with it. And my desire was waning as well. My big positive out of practice was helping other people achieve what they didn't think they could unless they'd been associated with us. And that's where my whole focus was the whole time. And then when I got to that point where I'd helped everyone, I think, as much as they needed, 80-20 rule, it was time to step back.
Yeah. So was it more a feeling that you felt like the game was kind of winding up for you? You weren't as passionate, as excited. Was it a sensation or specific kind of metrics that you got?
Well, it was obviously a combination of a lot of things. And the tipping point was when, my business partners very honestly, which I appreciate from them, said, 6 months would be great. Then I went back and reassessed what I was doing, why I was doing it all. And look, there was a financial goal. I'd worked hard all my life and grew up with not much at all when I was a kid. And so I wanted to be financially secure. I'd ticked that box. I'd done enough. I had enough. I am enough. That's Jim Carrey.
Yeah. And just for those people who are desperately fearful of the other side, that, oh my gosh, when I don't have my practice, I lose my identity, what will I do? Let them know what it's really like, Arch.
I had a very big media profile for decades and, books, spoke around the world many times, national TV, the whole lot. And I learned a very important lesson while I was there, especially during the television on Channel 9. That was cutthroat. That was ruthless. You could be top of the tree one day and then literally come back from holidays and someone had painted over your car space. How people found out they were gone, right, from network stars. And so that was a great lesson. And I just took that with me and I thought, you know what, you're the rooster one day, the feather duster another. My identity was never in my practice. It never was. And so I think that's really important. But look, equally, someone else's journey is totally different. I've got a great mate who's in his late 70s, absolutely loves being a vet, still working as a vet, and good luck to him. Just wasn't for me. I just got myself to that point.
Can I ask a question, Sam? You say, Michael, you'd reached your financial goals. Did you have very clear goals? Basically, how do you know when enough is enough? Because I see other people in a situation of going, I think I'm fine, but what if I'm not? And they're nervous to let go because they still see it as how do you get clarity on that one?
Yeah, and this is why I think there's a real gap at the moment that people need to talk more about this to help people in that transition phase. I got 2 financial advisors to look at all my books and all my numbers, as well as my accountant. I got a coach as well who coached me through the process. And I asked a myriad of my friends who were 5 to 10 years older than me, who'd already retired, how much they had. And they were very good and very honest, how much they had. And I saw their lifestyle and I thought, okay, well, that's the number I need. And then I went back and everyone went, yeah, good. So,
out of interest, what was the number your friends came up with? I'm curious.
Yeah, okay. So I'll think of one guy in particular. He has a 1 to 2 month holiday overseas each year with his wife, new car every now and then, lives quite a good life. And he said he just needed 5 million in super.
Right. This is something that when we test it in a room, most people have this absurd figure they think they need to live a cracking life.
What was that?
Well, I heard of people going, I'm going to need 30 million and 40 million and things like that. And I just don't know how they come up with the figure. I think the arm wrestle is true, how much is enough. And the only way you're really going to be able to litmus test it, which is why I asked the question, is someone who's living it and going, I'm living the life I want, and this is how much you actually need to live that life. It's the only litmus test I think you really need. Yeah,
and look, this is where the financial advisors helped. I had this vague thing in my head and a vague thing from my mates. They showed me the actual number that if I was smart and did it, what, and I went, oh gosh. And I'm sure most people are like that. We've got far more than we need.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's just go back. It sounds like life was all rainbows and unicorns for you, Arch. You never had a struggle a day in your life, which is, everyone looks at the 30-year overnight success story. Wind back to the start of the journey and give our listeners a little insight to the backstory of what it was actually like.
Yeah, so graduated 87, worked in country practices. My first good life lesson was I got offered a job up in the Northern Tablelands of New South Wales on the premise of buying in at a certain formula. Went up there, great. Business took off when I was there, had a whole sheep consultancy thing going, and got to the point and the boss there tripled the figure. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So it was time to move on, and then moved down, set up a practice from scratch, and it was, just started doing it quite tough. Reached a point I had an $8,000 overdraft. I was overdraft $7,960 and had 4 sausages in the fridge. Yeah, laugh away. That's hilarious. And I'm lying on the floor thinking, oh, maybe my old boss will take me back, And then I just had that Cortez moments of burning the boats. And I went, who are you really? Who are you as a human being when the going gets tough? And I thought, right, we're going to do this. And then that business turned into a success. I got headhunted up to Canberra in a big practice then. Unfortunately, business partner got cancer and died very shortly after I was there. But, practice continued to flourish and grew from 6 vets to 13. And then this practice, I'd had a partner and got thrown a bit of a curveball, and that all went south. Almost had nothing. And it was another one of those realisation checks about, well, what are you going to do? After I had a pity party for 2 days, I said, righto, away we go. And then ended up, choosing really, really smart people to be associated with and people I could absolutely trust. And it became a huge success, the practice group of 9 hospitals and 160 staff and 64 vets.
So I just want to go back a little bit to that moment in time, because believe it or not, that wasn't that long ago, if we're talking about the longevity of life, because that was the trip that I was on the junket one. I remember the day that you told me that things had gone, he'd been thrown a curveball, and I think my somewhat poking comment was, hey Arch, this will probably be the best thing that ever happened to you one day. Not that you'll get it now. And I think he looked at me with daggers as this, oh God, take your positive stuff and shove it. So that was, what was that, 15 years ago?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So in 15 years, you essentially started pretty much from scratch again and built it up into 9-bed hospitals. What was different about when you started, let's call it the second iteration, where you're essentially starting from scratch 15 years ago? Did you attack it from a different strategy to what you'd been using previously? We often talk about you start with the end in mind. Did you have like a blueprint of, okay, here's how I'm going to go about it this time?
No. And it cost us $100,000 in the first practice we bought of profit loss. So my plan then was, and I had a really big hospital, right? 13 vets. I'll just run this the same way I do the current practice. And that was me as the partner and employees running around. And it just didn't work. We just got no traction. It was just not happening, this other practice. It was about 15 minutes away from our major site. And it wasn't until I took on a partner that, this is how you do it, right? So I realised I had to do something different and get somebody with skin in the game. And then subsequently, every time we looked at a practice, there was always somebody. We didn't jump until we had someone. And when we had someone, then we went looking. In the end, people were approaching us. We wanted to stop at 5, but in the end, people were saying, I want to go into business. I need your help. Can you come on board? And we were like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I'm interested in that bit when you identified that you needed to have a partner in practice. You identified that because for a lot of people, partnerships, we're actually going to do a podcast just on partnerships. But I want to get your take on it. Why did you identify you needed a partner when you just had one practice? What was it that you're looking for in that partner?
Well, I was lucky enough to be on the first fleet reenactment in 1988 and sail the square rig a boat out from Portsmouth to Sydney Harbour. And there was a permanent crew member on there who crewed in the Mediterranean on these luxury yachts. and he crewed for one guy. And the guy, he comment to this guy, Paul, he said, partners, he said, I'd rather drink poison than have a partner, right?
Yes.
And so that was in the back of my mind. But I was just trying to do all by myself, and I just knew it couldn't happen. And then if I wanted to scale, there's no way I could do it. Now, I know this has been a very successful model, and Craig over in WA set up that by himself, but I looked at Charles Foster back in the day. He was down in Victoria. He had 8 or 9 practices, and that was the model we adopted. And it's 80-20 rule, remember, Sam? I keep banging on about that, but I could put 20% into this, that's all. I didn't have any more room.
Yeah. So was the plan to scale to multiple practices?
Yeah, because we saw the corporates coming, and we wanted to have a critical mass to be able to defend against. We didn't know what that looked like, although you and I have been over to spend a lot of time in US and UK looking at corporates. I didn't know what it was going to look like in Australia. So, yeah, we had planned to scale and actively.
Yeah. So when you said essentially people would approach you later on down the track, when you were going to your second, third, fourth partner practice, what attributes did you look for and that you'd ear tag someone as a potential partner that might need grooming, or, yep, I reckon they're ready to go?
You've got to get someone to match you, okay, or work good with you, because it's going to be different for everyone. Some people choose certain partners that I wouldn't have gone into business with for various reasons. And I knew that early on, and I counselled them, and I said, this is not someone I want to go into partnership with. And there are other people. It's hard. You know it. Terrible, sorry. You know when you see it, right? But we had the benefit of having this critical mass of veterinarians where we could identify. We'd worked with these people. They knew me. There was trust. There was respect. There was work ethic. We always hired on professionalism, productivity, and team fit. It was incredible team fit. They were smart enough to realise at the end of the day you've got to pay the electricity bill. It's a whole thing, but yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever get someone that came and joined your practice, and the reason they joined is because I want to become a partner? So was it led by them wanting to be a partner, or was it always you identified someone that you'd been working with for a period of time that could become a partner and they got the tap?
So the first half we identified, second half people came to us. But we turned people down too.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going to work.
So let me ask you this question. If someone came to you and they said, I want a partnership from the get-go, would you ever do that, or you have to have time in the trench before you'd go, yeah, let's be a partner?
It happened. It wasn't my desire, but that has happened. Sorry, I can't be more specific than that.
If you were giving advice to your younger self, how would you go about selecting those partners? Would they have to go through your process, your system, your practice, and come through that way?
Yeah, I really think you need to, because you can see someone coming in from a successful practice who might have been a partner in that practice, and you look at them and you go, oh, wow, they've got all their ducks in a row. But until you're in the same building, you just got no idea. Their culture might be very dictatorial, and that's how they try and achieve their outcome, whereas mine was always about empowering staff, giving them enough room to make some mistakes in a safe environment, and always happy with 80%.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit of just the logistics. Someone's identified they'd like to be a partner, and when you say a partner, that's not in your current practice. It's essentially, okay, there's going to be a new site and you're going to become a partner in that. Is that how it worked? And just walk us through how they'd go through the percentages and buy-ins and things like that.
Sure. So there's a little bit of variation on this. One of them is that if we've got the site and we're bringing someone on, then we will bring them on at 10% for a year, and then 10% for the next year, and then 13% for the year after, to give them a 33% equity holding. Now, it's quite variable. Some are 40%, some are, but that's essentially the case, because we always valued our practices at 4 times the multiple profit, but we're talking about practices that the profitability percentage is between 25 and 32%. So it's quite expensive. And the profession's given me a lot. You've got to give back, and you can't charge people more than that. That's just not right. So a way of achieving that is doing this progressive buy-in, because once you've got skin in the game, of course, the thing takes off. So on one hand, they're paying more for the next 10%, next 13%, but in the same time, their 10% initial holding the value has gone up, skyrocketed. So it works for both. And then the same sort of thing when you sell out. That's what I did in some of the practices. I progressively downsold rather than some of them I just was straight out and some I progressively downsold.
And that was just your set method of valuing was buy in, buy out, it's 4 times. That's our metric.
Yeah, but by the time those factors are all taken into account, you're probably getting 6 to 8.
Yeah, sure.
In reality.
Sure.
Can I ask a question about the model? I'm always curious let's say I'm a vet and I want to own a business. Why would I do it in a model like that and not just start my own thing? Why would I want to be Michael's partner and not Michael?
Yeah. So
have you met Michael? Who wouldn't want to be his partner?
Thanks, Sam. Well, you've got the economy of scale. That's pretty big. When you're talking about percentages of profit, that's quite a bit. You've got the intellectual property. It's a real plug and play. It was pretty simple. Your whole software system, we just dumped all our standards of care and everything just chapunk into a brand new computer system, and away they went. You've got employment. You're suddenly drawing from this pool of 164 vets. So, Bill's sick today, we're going to send Mary over. So you've got that. You've got the accounting side. It's taking the stuff that some vets just want to cut, diagnose and prescribe, right? And you're allowing them to do that if that's where they're most efficient and, getting the most bang for buck.
Okay.
Or if that's what drives them.
Okay, but then you do have to have the system to make it worth their while, right? Because I do see other businesses trying to sell that sort of model, but then there's not the actual support. The person goes, well, I'm still doing everything by myself, but I'm giving most of my profit or 80% of my profits going to the head office.
Yeah. And that's the culture thing, I suppose.
Let's talk a bit about culture. I remember when we caught up sort of towards the later stages of you owning the practices, and you said, I asked how much you were working, and of course you're always very happy to tell me that it was, I think you were half a day a week or something because you like to do a couple of consults, but then you said essentially you're responsible for just a couple of things. Just mind sharing what they were?
I hated money and numbers and accounting, but I realised that I wasn't going to get anywhere in business if I didn't change my paradigm. So I became obsessed about, and now there's many iterations on the market, just about analysing my figures every month. 11 KPIs every month, bang. And this is the 80-20 rule, right? So I just focused on these. The 20% of KPIs I knew was going to make 80% of difference in the business, and I became obsessed by that across all the practices. So I really had my finger on the pulse. That's one thing I contributed. And the other was really an intolerance to poor behaviour. It can be all sorts of things. It can be towards other staff. It can be towards themselves if they're sabotaging themselves. It can be towards clients.
So culture. Yeah. So essentially the culture of an individual's, the culture and then the behaviour, is it aligning with your culture or not?
Yeah. So I would move people. I only ever sacked 2 people in my whole career. One was for gross misconduct, and the other really wasn't a sacking. They were on a trial period and we decided we're not going to extend the trial. Everybody else I helped understand that this wasn't the place for them and that they would flourish in another environment. And we got on, and still friends with all those people.
But actually, Arch, you shared with me the most mystical tool once about writing the name of someone in the back of the book. Now, I presented this to a corporate. They really didn't think it was very good with HR, but I think it's hilarious. And I've tested it with all our members know this. It's write the name in the back of the book. Oh, you know how you get someone who you don't think is fit to leave? And I said, no. He said, write the name in the back of the diary. Interesting, tell me more. I said, well, you write the name in the back of the diary. And you do what? He says, nothing, they leave. I was like, really? He said, yeah, try it. So I tried it personally and it worked. And I went, this is weird. So I was running it's called a veterinary business boot camp. It was like a 3-day immersive event. And I challenged everyone there. I said, have I heard about this mystical way of HR? And anyway, I told them about it. I started these phone calls next week. You're not going to believe it. That person who was trashing my culture, they just walked in and resigned.
What is that? Hey, that's bizarre. I even had one staff member who I shared this with. She was lovely. I told her about this, and she came to me once and said, my name's not in the book, is it?
It's like black magic. It's like a voodoo trick almost.
It's spooky. I had one staff member, and dead set it's true, because you can ring up this other practice manager and she'll verify it. We had a lot of problems with this person, and not only did I write their name in the back of the book, I wrote a date next to it. And it was on that date they came to me, because I said to my other staff, if they haven't resigned by this date, I will actually move them on. And lo and behold, it was on that exact date they came to me.
I remember, because this was after an event. I asked you at one of the events that we were at together, I said, Arch, did you ever put a date? We're talking about planning, and however in your plan you want to put a date of execution, because it sort of gets the universal, principles working in your direction. And I said, did you ever put a date that they were going to leave? He's like, oh, I never tried that. And I remember when you rang me up and you were laughing so hard. You know when someone's laughing so hard they can't talk? And he's trying to tell me the story. He's giggling like a Cheshire cat all the way through. And he said they came in 10 minutes before the close of business on the day that you had said they would resign.
The one that's it. I still remember that, yeah.
So largely, other than writing their name in the back of the book, if there's somebody you said you coached a lot of people, obviously that this wasn't a fit for them, okay, they moved to another business. How did you handle people they'd sort of strayed off the path a little bit and need bringing back in more aligned with their values?
Yeah.
How'd you do that? Was it a cup of coffee? Was it a formal discussion? How do you have those conversations?
It depended on the person and the situation and who they were in the practice, and sometimes you just start the ball rolling by a little quiet word when there's only two of you in the treatment room, and my absolute phrase was, what's happening in your life? And then that'd get them talking. Or the other one was, look, you're not happy, what's going on? And get them chatting. Sometimes you'd pull them in and give them a formal warning, something had happened, and that became very, very obvious then that they were going to be moved on. It never got, as I said, never really got to the end of those. But it's usually just a very quiet, look, can I have a quick word to you? I know you're not happy. What's the matter? And then people are pretty reasonable.
And you would then bring them around to, because I've noticed that you did blur, and that,
yeah.
So you're understanding, please help me understand your situation first before I want you to understand my situation.
And then, absolutely, that's exactly it, Sam. That's exactly it. And look, sometimes people just want permission to say it's not okay, I'm going to look for something else.
Yeah.
And it opens that thought process. It's a subconscious thing too, isn't it? Like right in the name, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not happy. Why am I not happy? And
so when you're across multiple practices, were you going into these different practices and essentially looking at culture and figures across all 9 practices, or were you leaving that largely to the person that was in the business to look after the culture as the business
So if we
owner?
set up a greenfield site, I'd leave that.
Yeah.
I'd leave that alone. But if we were buying an established practice, I'd go in and actively work very hard on that practice. I'm thinking of one in particular, very hard to get the culture right. The first practice we ever bought, we went through the entire professional and support staff twice within 6 months.
Well,
It just was not going to go anywhere with the people they had,
And did you find that most of your managing culture was really on the fly stuff rather than, okay, we need to formally manage culture? It was little chats here and there and, how are you going? Is that where most of the direction came from in establishing correct culture?
When you say culture, it's such a broad term. It's everything from the gathering of vets at night to talk about, once a month meetings, that to what happens on the floor. And it's on the fly mostly. You've got to lead by example. There's nothing new there.
But something that I noticed you did particularly, Arch, is you really cared about your teams and you made them feel valued. You made them, like, by example, you'd buy them a book or you'd do, it was the little things that you didn't need to do. Would you say that you got a lot of buy-in literally because you actually really truly cared for them as humans? Yeah,
and circling back to the questions earlier on about when you know it's time to leave, it was just getting too much to me. It sounds very egotistical, but the care that you give to the staff was just too draining. I just couldn't do it anymore. Yeah. And you know what it's like too, when you've got a pet there, when the owner leaves, that pet becomes your pet. You take on all that, well, vets do, they just can't not worry about that animal, be concerned about its health until you give the pet back to the owner. It's the same as staff. You worry about them.
Yeah.
Comment, Sam. It's interesting if you talk about how little towards the end you actually did on the floor, clinical work. I feel like there's possibly a link there to say, well, you can only care to that extent and care about do the little things that matter to the team if you're not there working, doing vaccinations in space 50 hours a week. Is that something there, Sam?
Well, we posed this to our alumni group on the weekend. There was someone who was struggling with that stepping back off being a clinical vet to being more, a CEO. And he, when you sort of got 1 foot in, 1 foot out, he just kept getting pulled back into doing the technical work because it's easy to do. And, there's someone not here, so I'll step in and cover them, as opposed to being, running the business. And I asked him a question. I said, look, if heaven forbid, some terrible accident happened and you had your 2 hands chopped off and you literally couldn't do any veterinary work whatsoever, and you worked full-time on your business, on developing your teams, your systems, your processes, your marketing, which one of those 2 scenarios, you on the tools or you as a CEO, is going to take the business further? And he said option 2, 100%, where he just wasn't on the tools because he was wholly, solely, 100% focus was on what has to happen in the business rather than what do I need to generate as a vet. So I'm assuming, Arch, that's probably the transition that you had to make in order to have 9 practices trundling along very nicely.
Yeah, and I'd counsel. I've had one partner, and she said, I've got to get my surgical skills better. I want to do my memberships, and I said, that's the biggest waste. If you're serious about business, you're going to be stuck in an operating theatre, you and a nurse, not talking half the time, operating on animals. You need to be out there, with the team, with the clients, with the business. So yeah, I actually actively discouraged them. And just something I thought, a point you brought up before about buy-in of processes and culture, and I'm a big fan of the Pareto principle, that I found that, and it's statistically proven, that if you implement a system from above, you only get 35% buy-in. If you let the staff develop it, you get 85% buy-in.
Yeah.
So I was always happy, 80-20, I was always happy with the staff to get to that point of what they thought was appropriate, and they would run it and they would keep it alive. And I think that was a lot of success too.
So you're giving them quite a lot of autonomy that it's their business. If you've got a good idea, let's develop it, run with it, and let's measure it, see how it goes.
And even if it's not, that's okay. You're going to learn, and the next one's going to be, next decision is going to be better. That's okay.
Yeah. Talking the 80-20 principle, which I know Pareto's principle is the way you live life, and I've actually adopted that a lot, Arch. I mean, I look at the people I hang out with, the things I say yes and no to. The 80-20 principle is an overarching, I think, a way of living life. You talked about that there are sort of metrics that you'd look at, certain KPIs applied the 80-20 principle. What do you reckon was the top 4, if you were to go and analyse the health of a business, are there 3 or 4 main ones that you would look at in order to see how it's going and whether you need to go down the rabbit hole and start looking a bit deeper to find out where the opportunities lie?
Okay, now remember that this is historical, so life's moved on in the last 3 years since I've retired. Obviously, gross fees, you got to know what the door's got to swing, right? You got to know what's going on. Dentals, number of dentals, that was a direct correlation between that and profitability, because not only was the dental there, it just meant that there was always this level of care that was assumed across the patient. So it wasn't just the dental, that was just a manifestation of it. We did.
So that's kind of what they refer to as a lead indicator. So it's the fact, it's not the actual number of dentals, it's the fact that you're doing dentals. It's what sits under that is to get to that level of dentals. There's obviously this approach of, hey, we have a higher standard of care, or this is the standard of care we adhere to, and that tends to be cross-contextual to doing extra radiographs, to doing laboratory workup, etc. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, it didn't matter how many dentals you're doing, but that's exactly how I viewed that figure. The other was very boringly, it was vaccination numbers.
Okay.
The reason I say vaccination numbers is because that showed me that this is once again a lead thing. It showed me that the administration was working and the systems and processes were working. A couple of times the vaccination numbers would be down and you go, hang on a minute, and we drilled down, we'd find out that a printer had broken at one of the practices, or someone had forgotten to press the button to send out the email reminders. So that was another one that we used to do. And then we had this other thing, we manufactured this thing called patient advocacy factor. Now, it had a bit of a formula, but essentially what it was an ability to rank vets against vets of a similar situation in practice. So new grads against new grads, surgeons against surgeons, clinicians against clinicians, and just see where they were going.
Yeah, because the segue into standards of care is probably right where we're going. That was kind of a measure of the what we call standards of care, you'd call patient advocacy factor.
Yeah.
And often, that can be translated when we talk about, average transaction value, you can see how many dentals they're doing and how many blood works they're doing, etc. And someone who's more frontline consulting says, well, that's unfair. I've got to have a lower average transaction value than a surgeon because it's, $4,000 per case that they're dealing with. Is that how you could do the real apples for apples and let them feel as though they're doing their bit on the team?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it made the new grads particularly feel very cared for because they weren't being compared to the surgeon. There was no, the expectations, that's ridiculous.
Did you find your new grads would sometimes come out and their advocacy factor could be off very, very high purely because they were just testing everything for everything? Did you ever see that?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. But I certainly saw cases where there was massive disparity, and revisit rate was another thing that we used to measure. And what was happening was, suddenly they were doing, every client was getting a revisit. So their patient advocacy factor went up. So it was good. It was really good. You're able to drill down and just find out, oh, hang on a minute, you shouldn't be doing that.
What have you got to say to people who are running practices and they say, yeah, I look at my figures each year after the accountant goes through and tells me how I went?
Like, seriously. I'm guilty. That used to happen back in the day, I remember the big hospital I was at, we were running at 8 to 9% profitability. And you'd think you were doing well just because, maybe there was money in the bank account. I don't know how we measured it. I don't know. But yeah, every month my accountant gave me this incredibly detailed breakdown of what was going on in each individual practice, and I'd pore over those things for a day or two.
Yeah. Putting time aside to understand what your figures are telling you, that's one thing, but that's looking retrospectively. To look forward, I think the real where is often missed is people looking at what their figures are, looking at the history and using that as a course to correct to say, well, what do I need to change here and now that in 6 months' time and 12 months' time or next month's time, these figures are going to look very different. So it's actually using it to determine a plan of action. What do these figures mean and what am I going to do differently as a result of them? Arch, how did you go? Let's talk about consistency of standard of care. So we've got 9 practices. How do you get that consistency of standard of care? Because a standard of care might be, well, dog's vomiting, give it some chicken and rice, and if it's still vomiting in 48 hours, 24 hours, and give us a ring, that'll be a standard of care. Another standard of care might be, let's bring it in. Our minimum standard of care is we do a blood test, we put in intravenous fluids for 24 hours till at least we know it's not vomiting before it gets sent home.
Yeah.
How did you come up with those standards of care? And then how did you get buy-in for people? Particularly, I'm interested when you bought a new practice that had an existing standards of care culture that would be very different to what you guys were looking at.
Yeah. So we developed our standards of care. Vets would go to conferences, they'd have to come back and update the standard of care. We had vet meetings where we discussed the standards of care. So everybody knew they were out there and that was the expectations. And then on the floor, there's a lot of collegiality and discussion of cases, and so that would just permeate through. We have rounds every day, talk about cases, so nothing got missed, hopefully. And then when we bought a practice that already had that culture, we just slowly but surely introduced it all, because it was usually a total mess these practices. Everyone was doing their own
Yes.
thing. So when these standards of care came along, everybody went, oh, thank goodness, we know where we're paddling the boat now. So that's fantastic. But it really is, remember, the standards of care to be successful have to be driven by the staff. They can't be imposed from the top because no one's going to comply, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay that they only do it 80% right. You know, cardiologists, human cardiologists are the same. They don't get it right every time.
We've developed a AI tool that essentially just chats with you and develops the standards of care for your practice. And so if you were using that, let's say you've got an idea of where you want the standards of care to be, would you introduce that to the team and saying, okay, guys, what do you think about these? What do you want added? What do you want removed? Or would you literally go to the team and say, I want you to develop the standards of care? Because we want that autonomy, but of course you've got a picture of what it looks like. Talk us through how you did that.
Well, you're going to be part of the process of developing the standards of care as an owner, but I would 100% give it 100% to the staff to do. There's no question. I mean, you really have to, you can't fart ass around with this stuff. You've got to be laser focused. You either do it or you don't. You don't just pick the eyes out of it. If you're serious about getting staff buy-in and wanting this standard of care to be implemented, trust them. They're smart people. They want the right thing for the pet. You know, they don't want to be embarrassed by practicing poor medicine. They're going to do the right thing. Allow them. And then you're going to be there with them along the way. You know, oh, what do you know, if Brian's doing the standard of care, you might say, oh, Brian, have you read that? Here's the paper about that pancreatitis thing I told you about, you know.
Yeah. Do you think that, particularly with more senior vets, you know, one of the challenges with more senior vets, an animal walks in and they can diagnose it from 30 yards away. Do you think they're looking for standards of care? Say, okay, well, this is the process that I'm going to follow, as opposed to, well, I know more, so therefore I can probably rule out faster, therefore I need to do less testing.
We've all been caught, Sam, you know, taking shortcuts. Everybody has. And so they're no different to me. And so, no, everybody defaults to the standard of care. And they've got to justify that when they do go to rounds. Oh, no, I'm not going to take an x-ray because I know it's a cruciate. Do you? You know, and here's the new grades going, really? If you cut corners? Yeah, no, it's not tolerated.
So, okay, that's the piece right there which comes up. Who leads that, do you? Because this is an endemic problem in practices. We hear the consistency of standard of care is one thing that practices say, I just struggle with.
Yeah. So everyone's developed the standards of care, right? They've all been developed with the team. The senior vets there have signed off as much as the junior vets. The senior vets then, how can they possibly look all the other vets in the face and go, I'm not following the standards of care that we all agreed on and developed and we're really proud of because I know better. This is culture again. You've got to get the right staff. You get someone arrogant enough to supplant that, you don't want them on your team.
So that's a discussion you're having with them fairly quickly.
They wouldn't have been hired. They wouldn't have been tolerated.
Yeah. Second last thing, Arch, efficiency. I have this viewpoint of what is a great vet, and I sort of think of like a triangle, and I think technical skills, communication skills, or ability to relate to team and clients, and the third one is actual efficiency in getting through what needs to be done. And this is not just vets, this is nursing team, this is reception, this is everybody. My take is that efficiency is a culture in a business, and I think a lot of businesses are wrestling with this right now. Call it a lack of productivity. I like the word efficiency. What was your viewpoint on it, and how did you get team buy-in around it?
So remember, we hire on productivity, professionalism, and team fit. So productivity. So it was important to us too that they could actually write work and generate an income so we could pay them.
How did you assess that in your interview process? How did you assess productivity?
Well, yeah, good question. There might be a history there before, you know, so we know what they're like. It was an expectation when we employed them. The big thing was team fit because they're on a trial basis, right? So the team fit was the big thing. The next thing was productivity, professionalism. We told them, we had a standards manual of this is how you're going to greet people and dress and all that sort of stuff. And then they were there for a month, so you could assess productivity. But we told them, we showed them what our expectations were. So the efficiency thing, I think it's important that you accommodate people, right? We had one vet who, she came to us as a new grad, and then after a few months she said, you know what, I just hate surgery. I just really don't like it. I said, that's okay. You don't ever have to do it again in your life. Don't feel worried about it. And so she became a sensational consulting vet, just really ran the team at the reception team at the front, ran the consulting vets, who generated an inordinate amount of work out the back for the introvert who never wanted to see a client, who just loved scalpels and suture material, and released them to be able to, be productive. And that's where your patient advocacy factor came in. So we were able to measure, compare people against people. And there's that soft skill of being able to work out which, get them all on the bus, but you've got to put them in the right seat on the bus as well.
And how did you, so we're fitting people to their zones of genius. So not everyone's going to be good at everything. The things that you're better at, you should do more of that, and likewise. How did you then, we've got an expectation of efficiency. Any little hacks that you used to use, more specific things that you think contributed to your businesses being more efficient?
What do you mean?
I think one of the ones I remember you shared with me is that you used to have, I love this line, Arch. I just love it. It's my new favourite line, is that nurses are often frustrated vets. And so they're so motivated to, the more you'll skill them up and let them do, they're going to be so enthusiastic about that they're often very happy to be very passionate and efficient around that. And you used to skill your support team up a lot, but you used to give the running of the day often. I think you said to your nurses that they would be the ones scheduling procedures and that, is that right?
Yeah, so you want to set people up to succeed, right? And it doesn't matter what level of that success is, they've got to succeed. Otherwise, their whole purpose of you got to read Drive by Dan Pink. Their whole purpose is gone. So set them up to succeed. How are they going to succeed? You get a new grad who's not very proficient. You get your very best team, support team, nursing team, to help that vet. The vet can muck around putting a catheter in, can't quite get it. Well, that's okay. With due respect, the nurse is bang first time. The anaesthetic's always going to be smooth, so the vet doesn't have to worry. Set them up to succeed. And then eventually, vets are naturally, when I say competitive, I mean in a good sense, they want to do their best. So they'll rise to the occasion. And you fit the surgeries in and the different skills into the different skills of the people as well. There might be someone who loves dentistry. Well, give them the dental stuff. Other people hate it with a passion. Me, don't give them any, So, that's the other thing, is just match them to set them up to succeed.
Yeah. This is fantastic, Arch. Looking back, what would today's Arch say to about to start out in business or 5 years into business? What advice would you give to your younger self?
It's okay to take risks, and more importantly, it's okay to fail. And in fact, it's almost to the point where you won't get anywhere unless you have failures along the way.
Did those failures always turn out okay? At the time, they seemed like it was the interview.
But they did, and you always hassle me about that. That's a loaded question.
Well, the reason I say that, here's an observation.
It's my turn to talk. I hated it, right? I absolutely hated it. And it just killed me. And every time I'd ring you, you were just laughing on the end of the phone. I swear if you were within distance, I would have snotted you. But you're right. I mean, Nietzsche what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's a bit of an idiot quote, but you do grow, and it's a mark of a human being of what they're like when they're down, not when things are going well. And so it's a good time just to reassess.
The observation I have is that when people are faced with big challenges, there are those people who think the hill's too big, I can't climb over it, so they throw the towel in. But even worse than that I see is they accept the hill's too big and they say, well, I'll just keep walking in the same spot here, or go around and around and I'll never get up. And it's the struggle. You must have had periods where the struggle was real, but I see people stay in the same struggle and they accept that this is just the way it is. I'm a practice owner. I don't get away. I don't have any money. I can't find the right team. I struggle. We very rudely call them struggle bunnies. And I think you will have had those times, because I've never spoken to any human being that's been successful that hasn't happened. But they just seem to have a different Is it intolerance to stay in a senseless struggle?
Do you know what? I've got a pretty good sense of self-worth, and I just can't settle for second best and to let myself down. I'd rather fail again and again and again than that this taste in my mouth of accepting second best.
So it's a personal standard?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is personal. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That may have been the only nugget we needed. Even if you take the other nuggets off the table.
I can't believe I haven't got out of this chair and walked around. Sam will me on the front, and I'm just sick of, like after 2 minutes, I'm up walking around doing something else, mowing the lawn. Or...
Sport of mine. How long did I keep him on the phone for? This is a record, by the way. This has been fantastic goal, and I think insights that are going to help a lot of people. You've actually answered a lot of questions that, particularly around partnership, going to multiple practices, things like that, how to do it. I think there's a lot of people going to get a lot of insight and hopefully stop them making some mistakes that along the way that they could shortcut it. So it's been hugely valuable, mate. Thank you.